This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Cookies, where we try to solve the world's problems through the miracle of carbohydrates, one recipe at a time, with host Marissa Rothkopf and her dog, Bosco.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Cookies. I am glad to be back with you all after a bit too long of a hiatus in which a lot of stuff was going on, not the least of which was I sent my firstborn off to college, which requires a lot of emotional and physical strength. I have got many recipes and brilliant guests to look forward to talking to this fall, and I am so grateful and glad to have you join us. My guest today is the prolific and brilliant Jennifer Senior, a staff writer for The Atlantic. Her latest is all about a profile of a friend of hers and her brothers who died on 9/11 and what she learned about grief and hope. We also talk about the effects of COVID on parenting and cake, because of course we do. Before we get to the show, a quiet plea that all of us podcast people have, and that is to please leave a review in the Apple Store and to, of course, share this podcast far and wide. Thank you. And without further ado, I am here with Jennifer Senior, who I had the pleasure of interviewing a long time ago about your book, All Joy and No Fun, Modern Parenting, and when you were back at New York Magazine. And I'm now here with her. She has gone from New York Magazine to the New York Times, where you were a book critic and worked the op-ed page. And now you're at the Atlantic.
Yeah, and liking it a lot.
This has just been, I don't know, really kind of crazy 2 weeks. And I think I should also ask you, do you prefer to be referred to as a her or just a host, like the Texas legislators would prefer you referred to as?
Her is fine. Or you can also call me dude. You know, I'm good with really, that's my son's, default when he's trying to explain something to me.
Right. For me, this week has been insane, or the past 10 days have been sort of insane on so many levels, from flooding in my basement to the, as we say, Hazarai, which is, I think, a State Department popular term in the State Department, basically a pig mess going on in the legislature in Texas, and then all around the world as far as women's health concerns going on all around the United States. COVID, masking, kids back to school, friend randomly dying, that sort of thing. And Rosh Hashanah, I decided we needed something soothing and old-fashioned to make. And that's why I'm reverting to the world's most famous cake, the Marion Burros plum torte.
Which I just ate last night. I mean, this is the weirdest thing. So it's Rosh Hashanah. Our neighbors come over, and she says, "I've made the plum torte from 1982 or whatever it is." It looked okay. So I have. Wait, is this 3 or 4 words? 3. One's a hyphenate. No, I guess it's 3 words. Square springboard pan.
A square springform pan. I would really like that. In fact, I will maybe buy myself one as a treat right after this.
Well, yeah, I think you probably have to go on like Amazon DE. I think she got hers in Germany.
Yeah.
But knock yourself out.
Well, this is a German style cake, right? And even though Marion Burros gets all the credit for it, I'm sure she got it out of the same German Jewish cookbook or German American cookbook that every grandma before Marion Burros got it from. It's a torte. It's a very plain butter cake that you top with, in this case, what we like to call Italian plums. They're very narrow and not hard to find, but only come out in September. That's why this torte is so kind of bound in time. Like, I make this, when my parents were alive, I would make this cake for them as many times as I could before the season ran out. And you make it and you put it in the freezer. But of course, you can make it with peaches or nectarines or cranberries or whatever the heck you want to put in there. So it really is flexible. I just put vanilla in mine, which is my big change. So na Marion.
Oh, well, now you can also, recopyright it and make it yours.
Yeah, because now it's mine because I've changed
You
something.
changed it. You changed the wording.
Yeah, so it's mine, which is actually how recipes work. So how are you doing in this wild, turmoil, rich climate that we're living in?
Fine. I'm COVID fine, right? Like, what do you grade this on? What's the bell curve, right?
I think fine is the greatest thing you can say.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like on the COVID bell curve, I'm crushing it. I don't want to make you jealous, but here's how I'm going to make you jealous. Nothing in particular at this very second is the matter.
Whoa! I wish I could give you this cake in honor of that. That is so fantastic. I want to start off with talking about the book that you wrote a while back, All Fun. All joy and no fun.
The paradox of modern parenting, parenthood. God, I don't even remember it anymore.
Whether you remember the title or not, it is a book worth reading. It gave me so many insights just at the point where my kids were at that age where you're like, I don't know how to do this. But you wrote an op-ed in the Times in February about parenting during COVID.
Yeah, I wrote 2 while I was a columnist there. Yeah, I wrote 2. They were crowd pleasers. Man, people respond to that.
Yeah. And why do you think that? What are the difficulties? To me, it is very much like what you were saying in your book.
I had 2 theories. One was that during COVID, we were 1950s parents and like 2020 parents all at once. And we were even like frontier parents because we were teaching our kids. We were, like Zoom school wasn't totally working. So we were also like running our own little red schoolhouses.
And having to hunt down paper towels.
Right. Well, certainly like men clothes and stuff. But 1950s parents in the sense that, I think a lot of modern parents, even those who don't have means, often get takeout, sometimes cheap and, very, and not particularly healthy takeout if you're working 4 jobs, say. But so everybody was suddenly cooking and everybody was suddenly cleaning up a lot and everybody was suddenly doing a lot of laundry. They were living very hard in their homes and they were doing their day jobs and they were responsible for childcare. They weren't outsourcing it to grandparents or to neighbors or to babysitters or whatever they were doing. It was like some kind of like cosmic singularity of parenting horribleness, where we were just like every era of parenting was upon us and it was very hard. And then the other column that I wrote was about the fact that I was really interested in the fact that pandemic parenting became this occasion for mothers in particular to beat themselves up and decide that they were just doing everything wrong. And I think it really hit us where we live because like there are 2 things that kids consistently grade their parents very badly on. Generally, when parents think that they totally suck, they're wrong. Like their kids don't actually agree and think that they totally suck. But there are 2 ways that parents actually do kind of stink. It turns out we're really bad at self-regulation. Like if you ask children, they give you very low marks for keeping your temper in check.
And this is my children in particular that you surveyed, I suspect.
No. I didn't survey them 1,000 times, but but it was done. And I would certainly get low marks for the self-regulation. And the other is sort of knowing what's going on in their lives, if they're adolescents in particular. During COVID, they were just the tentacles of the internet were just like sprouting from their hair, wired directly into their head. So it sort of hits you where you live, right? These are the things that we feel vulnerable about anyway, and that we think we're doing a bad job at anyway. And then we are suddenly losing our tempers with like almost metronomic like regularity. And we really don't know what's going on when they're sitting upstairs and are they Zooming or are they socializing or are they, looking at porn? I don't know what they're doing. I try and keep on top of what my son was doing, but I was also doing 14 things at once. I was working and I was like making dinner and I was cleaning up and all the things.
And at the same time, there was also an incredible burden on kids across the board. I've only started realizing halfway through, which was a social issue, like teenagers in particular, well, all kids, the social aspect of their lives is so important that we were seeing an increased rate of suicidal ideation in my town. Like I heard that from various therapists, that it was just like really hard for kids to get space in psych wards and ERs and other issues like that, that made parenting in this time, well, kids were responding to parents in some cases. They were dealing with really difficult issues at home. And in other cases, we're dealing with social issues with school and stuff. And parents had to then deal with that. It was so many layered that I find myself and I see others. Do you feel exhausted?
Yeah. First of all, I don't know about numbers, kids and mental health numbers. I mean, it looked like parents' mental health had steeply declined, and it looked like anxiety in kids had certainly gone up. In terms of suicide and stuff, I think the numbers are out on actual suicides. It wouldn't surprise me if ideation and, I think COVID broke a lot of kids. I think a lot of very anxious kids became more anxious. And, I'm exhausted. I think everybody's exhausted because, you're not quite working and you're not quite parenting. You're in this very liminal space and all the borders have collapsed. And you know what? That's for those of us who are lucky, honestly. That's for the people who can, work from their homes, we are truly in some bizarre way, like non-essential. The essential employees had all these other concerns that are just like so much tougher, where they couldn't get childcare.
They couldn't get home and see their kids.
They couldn't get home, right. And their kids were not being taken care of at school. The meltdown was total and in a much more catastrophic way, revealing all sorts of catastrophic things about the American safety net or lack of one. But yeah, I'm tired. But again, like compared to what? And compared to
But I'm fine.
Right. But I'm actually fine. Right. Exactly.
Which leads me to, it's a strange segue to the most recent article that you've written, which is in The Atlantic. And it's about Bobby McIlvaine, who died on 9/11. And your takeaway, and we'll get more deeply into the story as we go on, but was about dealing with grief. And that to me is related to I'm fine. I had a very strong, straightforward takeaway from Bobby's mother about how people talked to her about her grief. Tell me a little bit about what she said.
Let me just back up and explain who Bobby was and why I wrote about him, just so that people are sort of grounded in the story. Bobby McIlvaine was my brother's college roommate. They both threw their stuff on the same bunk bed their freshman year, first day. And they stayed roommates for 4 years. And then they moved to New York and they found a 2-bedroom, on like First Avenue, all the way over, in the rentable, affordable part. And he was just this remarkable self-invented creature. He was, unusual in his family. He was this athlete scholar. His parents were school teachers. He didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He didn't live in a town that pumped out kids who went to Ivy Leagues. His parents had no expectation that they would have a child who went to the Ivy League. And here's this miracle kid who, is just like, seems like he's heaven sent. And I think I wrote in the piece, it's like he's descended from the heavens through a basketball hoop, or I can't remember how I wrote it, but he seemed to come from nowhere. He dies on September 11th. The family is in shock. And all 3, everybody who is in his orbit, but like his mother, his father, his brother, and his almost fiance, they all grieve differently. You ask about his mother and you ask for this poignant reason, which is, I'm fine. I'm fine. So yeah, I'm fine. Helen, his mother, was really hell-bent on not being viewed as a victim. And so they live in Philadelphia. There weren't tons of people in Philly who had relations who died. And she didn't want to be the woman in the grocery store who people were whispering about, or, she didn't want to deal with people fumblingly coming up to her and saying the wrong thing, or she didn't want to manage people's discomfort or their awkwardness, as the bereft are so often left to do. So she switched grocery stores for 15 years. She went somewhere else. She just couldn't deal with it. And people would ask her how she was at work, and she would say, I'm fine. She just really didn't want to deal with it. She talked about it with her so-called limping group. That's what she called them. They're just women who were all local, who all lost kids at various points, none during 9/11. But it was 9/11 that made them all decide to regularly meet, and they all kind of clustered around Helen. They had already been living for years with grief, but they folded her in, and this became her support system. But it was the only time she ever talked about it, really. Obviously talked about it with her husband, but she really put up this kind of steel front. She talked very openly about how this caught up with her maybe a decade in, like she just realized she was not fine. And she really needed to do something else to make herself better.
You, I think, also talked about what have you learned about talking to people who are grieving?
Oh, God. Okay. So for starters, I was framing my questions really poorly. Like I was saying things like, who do you think has processed this the best, or, who's come the furthest in these 20 years? I would say this to each member of the family. It's a horrible thing to ask. I know them. So I felt like it was the kind of thing where I could ask them this question, but it's so misguided and it's so insensitive. They were also gracious and never even said that it was awful, but it is kind of awful. I mean, the bottom line is that sort of suggests that people have to get over their grief or through their grief or around their grief or whatever. And that's like such a tyranny. Some people just choose to inhabit their grief. They don't get over it. I also learned from Bobby's brother, just listen and ask questions. What he hated the most was he would tell people my brother died on 9/11 and they would tell him their 9/11 story. It seems ridiculous, like seriously. And you would not believe how many people did it. They do all kinds of things because they get so nervous. They don't have a language to discuss grief. They don't have intuition to discuss grief. They tend to react very strongly. They have a strong kind of emotional response filled with intensity, but it doesn't necessarily translate into the right stuff.
I think sometimes just saying the simplest thing, like, that's terrible, is really just sort of the way to do it. You don't know how someone's going to respond one way or the other, but telling stories about yourself or your pet cat or some other sort of death that you experience, it isn't helpful when you have an old parent die and someone's like, oh, we're how old? Oh, well, they lived a rich life. And you're like, yeah, but it's still my mom and she's dead.
Well, that's just it. But it's still my mother, right? That's just it. Like, that's immaterial. No, I agree. I mean, there's a whole species of this kind of thing. I mean, Caitlin Flanagan wrote recently in The Atlantic about, people telling her, oh, be more cheerful. She has like stage 4 cancer. So people have all sorts of ideas about how you got the cancer, what you should do to treat the cancer. I mean, suddenly everyone is a doctor. And the implication is that it's your fault in some ways. And I think that like there was an implication in the way that I framed these questions initially to the McIlvaines. I was trying to figure out, it's 20 years. How are you all doing? Who do you think has come the furthest? It's like as if it were some kind of race. It was a dunderheaded way of framing it. They're such lovely people and I know them so well and they know that I'm not a jerk. So it was okay to have made that mistake. But nonetheless, it's not a mistake I would recommend anyone else make.
His father has dealt with this in a completely different way.
He leaned way into his grief. He talks about 9/11 all the time. And for him, it's basically September 12th every day. I mean, he cries very easily. His grief is very close to the surface. And he'll talk to anyone who will listen about September 11th. It's largely because he really believes now that the government was behind it, that it was a controlled demolition and that they brought down the towers, that this was not the handiwork of hijackers, or that the hijackers were incidental but didn't bring it down and bring the towers down. And so he spends every day of his life running around trying to convince people that this is true. He wants to talk about the abuses of American empire. He's very big on that. He talks to people all over the world about this. I don't agree with him at all. His theories are, in fact, dangerous, but this is what he believes, and it's what he's dedicated himself to. And every morning he wakes up and he goes to his study, and this is what he does.
And that's his way of dealing with his grief.
It's both, right? I mean, I think it's his way of dealing. His son is very careful to say, it would cheapen it to say that it's only a grief strategy. But both can be true because I've asked him and he says that this is how he keeps Bobby close, by keeping it alive, by keeping September 11th alive, and by, talking about this, over and over and over again. I think it's interesting that he has chosen a theory that no one will ever come around to believing because it means he can always talk about it. To me, it does look like it's serving a purpose for him. And he says that it's serving a purpose for him, but it's not the fact that it's a fool's errand. That's not why he would say that it's serving a purpose for him. He says it's serving a purpose for him because he feels like he's number one, spending time in Bobby's company. And number two, he's making the world a better place by exposing American malfeasance and abuses. And it's not like America has behaved impeccably, in the last how many decades?
Right. Hundreds of years or something. Yeah.
We did fine in the, in both World Wars I and II, I would say, but we acquitted ourselves just fine. But, there are reasons to critique America, very legitimate ones. So, he just happens to have gone off on a tangent that I don't think is particularly helpful, but I love him. I love the guy.
How did you choose as a journalist to involve yourself in this very intense story with a very personal twist? Was it the coming of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 or?
Yes, but it was two things. I mean, so that was one. And then the second was that, so I had this kind of weird plot device. This is how I got myself involved in the story. I'm very old school. As you know, I tend to keep myself out of stories, but I sort of had this idea that I had a mission for this one, which was to try and get back a diary of Bobby's that the McIlvaines no longer had. Bobby kept a lot of journals, which was very unusual for a 26-year-old and an adolescent. He had kept them since he was a teenager. He had all these journals, and the McIlvaines had them except for one. They didn't have the last journal he ever wrote, which is to say the one he was writing as recently as September 10th, for all they knew. What happened was that they were clearing out his apartment, and the woman that he was about to propose to, her name is also Jen, she asked his father whether she could have it because she was looking at it. And she noticed that her name was everywhere in it and that it was primarily about her, or that there were many pages about her. And she said, "Can I have this?" And he was just in a fugue state. I mean, he had just learned that his boy had died. It was like I think he had known for 24 hours that his boy was dead. And they had proof, they had confirmation. Bobby was one of the few bodies they recovered from the site. So they knew he was on the periphery. So he knew his boy was dead. He knew that he had to clean up. They had a funeral to prepare, to plan. And so she asked, "Could I have this diary?" And he said yes without thinking. And his wife got so upset afterwards and said, "How could you give away the last thing our son ever wrote? This was a chance to spend time in his company, to hear his voice, to get a kind of full visibility into his adult thoughts. And also, I just want to hoover up every molecule of everything in the world that belonged to him to reassemble him." And he didn't have an answer for this. I mean, he was just doing what he thought was right. And there was his, almost fiance looking imploringly at him. You can understand how this happened. And you can understand why his almost fiance wanted it. Helen, his mother, kept asking his fiance, this woman who she didn't know very well, "Can I have it back? Or can I see it?" And she kept kind of hemming and hawing. And eventually she just said, "Okay, can you type up the parts that aren't about yourself? If he's describing a tree, can you just give me the words?" Things got so acrimonious and tense between them that even that didn't happen. She was living with the McIlvaines right afterwards. She moved in with them because she couldn't stand the emptiness of her own apartment, but she would not give it back. And I thought that made me very angry. I got really outraged on Helen's behalf. For years, I kind of thought about that diary. I know Helen thought about that diary. It became this source of just mystery and fury, and it symbolized something to her, right? It was just one more lost thing. And it was like a portal that she couldn't have. And it's almost like, you have that Superman fantasy where you spin the globe backwards to rewind time. And as a parent, you kind of want that. And she didn't get it. So I thought, I'm going to see if this woman would, Jennifer, who seemed really nice, and I bet in hindsight had her reasons, like maybe she'll give me a chance to look at it. Maybe she'll let the McIlvaines see it. And she did.
I heartily recommend to everybody who hasn't read this story to read it. Your writing on this story is so, I hate to say beautiful, but it's just so well written. Let's just make it very simple. It is just extraordinarily well written. It's a beautifully told tale in the path that it takes. Like, as the editor in me goes, "Oh, that's just amazing." If we're going to look at 9/11 just being able to focus on one person's story, even though there are many of them, for those of us who weren't there or don't have someone specific who died, I think it's a really poignant way to remember the day. So I thank you for writing it. To me, one of the greatest challenges of this, of as a journalist in writing this story, was you come across some new insights or possibilities about like where Bobby was before or as the towers were falling or explode, had been crashed into. And you told his father, and which had to change his worldview on, or his idea of what was going on, what happened on 9/11. Did you have any second thoughts about like loosing this new information on him, or how hard was it?
You are the first person to ask me that. And I'll tell you something, I was really nervous about it. Here's the thing though, for your listeners to understand, what I had discovered was comforting from the point of view of a parent. If you are tormented by the thought of how your kid died, I thought it was very clarifying. The stuff that I had sort of discovered, I think, removed some of his biggest nightmare scenarios. The problem with what I found out was that it interfered with his theories about what the government was doing, with his conspiracy theory. It tampered with his worldview. And he had a very elaborate reason for thinking that Bobby was walking into the lobby and that explosives went off before he got upstairs. And it didn't correspond with the facts. And some of the facts that he actually, this is what was most interesting to me, once knew and then forgot. He actually knew, I don't want to say exculpatory, but like facts that would have, that's not the word. There should be a word like debunkatory, but it's not a word. Facts that would actually debunk this theory, or not debunk. He could still hang on to the idea, I suppose, that the towers had been embroidered with, explosives, and that the government had planned this demolition. But it then no longer could be the way that he had envisioned it. And I was nervous because I didn't want to appear confrontational or like I was just kind of trolling him and fact checking him. But I sort of thought, I got to tell him this because some of it really should put his heart to rest to the extent that anything can be. I mean, it's just making a horrible thing marginally less terrible, but it was less terrible. If I had learned something more horrifying, I don't think I would have said anything. And I don't think I know. And honestly, I'm not sure I would have printed it. I don't, these aren't the Pentagon Papers, right? So if I'd found out something personal about Bobby that was very upsetting, I don't know. I'm very grateful I didn't have to face any question like that, because there it's like, I think my allegiances would have been really badly torn between wanting to protect this family I know and love and, what you're supposed to do as a journalist. But I think I would have come down on the side of like, the public doesn't need to know about this, right? But what I wrote about here, I think it was a matter of public record. It was stuff that his father once knew anyway. It should have been a source of great comfort to him. And it upset his worldview about his trutherism kind of stuff. But it didn't introduce any new nightmares about his son. If anything, it allayed them.
If anything, right, it could allay them. Absolutely. I know that you have a short time frame, a small window here on The Secret Life of Cookies. The cake isn't even done. But I will say that I appreciate you being here. And I do recommend that every single person read this article. It's in the September 2021 issue of The Atlantic, which you should probably subscribe to, everyone, anyway. No, this is not a paid promotion. It's just like really fantastic journalism happening there. And I don't want to give anything away to the audience, but I do want to say to you, with my editor hat on, the last paragraph, the last sentences of your essay were brilliant.
Thank you. It took a couple of times for me to stick that dismount, just the last sentence. And all I'll say to you is that the way that it finally worked, italics, had to be in italics. Without the italics, didn't stick.
Okay, everybody, you've learned a lesson here about journalism. And I also will say, look out for the italics, people. And I thank you, Jennifer Senior, for this little moment here.
Thank you. And this has been so fun. So fun. You're lovely. And your kitchen is to die for.
And hopefully sometime again soon, your next story, come back on and we'll talk about it and bake something together. Thank you to Jennifer Senior for being my guest this week. Please read her article in the September issue of The Atlantic. You can find the recipe for the plum torte on my website at marissarothkopf.com, along with a few pretty wicked innovations that would make Marion Burros' hair curl. Please like this podcast, love it, share it, The Secret Life of Cookies with friends. And thank you and have a great week.